Today, our guest is Ryan Long. He's a famous comedian out of New York that is making a lot of waves because he is a guy that pushes the edge. He pushes against wokeness and that type of crazy culture in the form of comedy, which is a beautiful way to do it. I originally met him in New York many years ago, right before COVID, actually, when I was still doing pranks, and he was a wonderful man. So we're happy to meet up 3 years later now and have this episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Long. I'm Tommy G. Welcome back to the Tommy G Show, the #1 LGBT podcast in the world. This is another episode of Safe Space, and I have my friend here, Ryan Long, a New York comedian. How you doing?
Hey guys, we just did a handy under the table to get in the mood for progress.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of that. That was probably the best 4 minutes of my day so far.
Yeah, it was 2 minutes for me, and then obviously I just left, went to the bathroom, cleaned up while you finished yourself off. I did not have the fortitude to do what it takes to get you done.
I'm disappointed, but I think the next time we'll figure it out.
Yeah, how does that... It's so funny, too, the idea that you just spent, like, last night you were just hanging out with all the most, like, hood gangsters in New York, and then you come here, and then you're like, gay jokes. They couldn't have liked that.
I tried a couple of gay jokes on them, and that's, like, the worst demographic, I feel like, to try gay jokes out.
Yeah. Well, the worst demographic would be like college kids don't like gay jokes, but for a different reason.
Yes.
That's the two. The one's like, you shouldn't be doing that because that's rude. And the other, like, or whatever, offensive. And the other is like,
we'll kick your ass if you say one more of those.
Yeah. No, but did it get a bit tumultuous when you talking about gay stuff?
I said something along the lines of like, well, one comment they said, they're like, oh, you're from Milwaukee? And they're like, yeah, you know, Jeffrey Dahmer was doing good by taking some of those guys out because basically, like, glad that he was taking more gay guys off the street.
And you're like, all right.
That's a take that you and Bill O'Reilly could probably have in common. But I think, and then I said, well, that's fine, but what about the trannies? And they weren't exactly thrilled about that transition.
No, they didn't like the trans either? Mm-mm. Okay.
So why do you think it is that, like, okay, you do a lot of comedy that is walking the line and you have a great fun time doing it, but does it feel like certain people can say stuff nowadays and certain people can't?
You mean that what you mean is, like, for example, like a minority could do race jokes
or
easier than like a white guy?
Like a black guy could easily say a gay joke and it not get, like, he won't get canceled as easy as if a white guy said a gay joke.
Black dudes they had a moment. I feel like they're getting canceled a little harder now.
Oh, okay. So the cis heteronormative blacks are getting canceled.
Definitely there's different groups that have, different things. I mean, and in real life, it's like that too. I mean, think about this. In real life, going up to you and telling you, hey, you look like someone would not be like, if I was like, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, would you go up to a black guy and be like, yo, you look like this guy? Like, the stakes are pretty high. If he was like, no, I don't, you'd be like, well, I'll kill myself then.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of it with normal people is just the same way the dynamics work in real life. You know what I mean? Like, the truth is, like, if a girl was on stage talking about beating the shit out of her husband, like, you could probably pull that off. If a guy was on stage talking about beating the shit out of his wife. So a lot of it's just that normal stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, of course, there's the, new blogger world with their rules. But I think people are increasingly give less of not a shit about their rules.
Do you feel like the pendulum's definitely swinging back?
I think that it's not that the pendulum swings back. It was that moment's over in my life. Because I see that as everything got super sensitive. That was like a moment. I don't know if, I think people, when they talk about the pendulum, it's more the left-right pendulum. Mm-hmm. So to me, it was more, the left-right pendulum, in my opinion, went more like the left-wing people became super annoying. Mm-hmm. Then essentially the right-wing people kind of figured out how to use that energy. And then now they're using that energy to sort of like be the same sort of thing.
And mock it.
Well, no, that was more people that were neither, I think, for the most part. I think the people that were sort of having more success mocking it were probably mostly like apolitical or, people in the center or just like, Bill Maher liberal types. You know what I mean? And then now I think that conservatives are kind of getting scoldy again of their being like, they're basically now the right wing and the left wing are both kind of have like a, you shouldn't be saying that sort of thing. They just have their different things that they think that you shouldn't be saying, which makes all normal people just sort of not pay attention to the whole thing. So I think that your average person just doesn't care that much anymore about any of it.
Here's where it is creeping a little bit, because
think?
I had a normal corporate job for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And the most recent place I was working at, they were like the progressives on the forefront that were like, I don't know, like wear like these special glasses. Like, I don't know if you know the new age, like if you want to be like an academic, it's like that clear frame glasses, like we're the thought leaders in the industry type of a thing. And it was a big, big push for normal people to get the pronouns in their bio. Like that was something we would talk about. And if you didn't do it, it was kind of like, why aren't you? Like,
It's a very
bad person. So like, it is creeping into.
Well,
like,
they basically
the
want you
HR
to put
departments.
there's the two schools of thought, right? But again, like here's an example. They just did a study that said you're less likely to get hired for a job if you put your pronouns on your resume.
I agree with that.
So there's the other side of that, right? And I get that because you're like, there is something to be said about if you work in those industries. Like I have like people that obviously I work with that work in Hollywood, right? And their company was pushing really hard for them to put their pronouns in their bio. And they're like, his argument was that that's basically like putting who I voted in my bio.
Yeah.
Like, yo, this is like America and you're making me, he's like, he's not even like a Trump guy, but he's like, yo, I don't want to put who I voted for in my bio, my political affiliation, because those things are, you know, if you're a person that says like, you have your pronouns in your like handle, we know everything about who you voted for, all that stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like a normal person is like, yo, I don't want to be like wearing a pin of who I voted for.
Yeah,
so
you
he
don't
didn't
want a
like
scarlet
that.
letter for the rest of your life following you into the employment.
Yeah, leave me like I don't want to be, you know, you're forcing me to pick a side, right?
Yes.
And they're saying in their mind, they're like, it's not a side, this is the right side. And in the rest of the world, they're like, yeah, well, the rest of the world doesn't see it that way. So I get when the one side is like, hey, if you want to thrive in this world, you put your pronouns in your bio. But like the rest of the world is like, when they see someone that's like, hey, I'm like Tommy, he, him, everyone's like, ugh, this guy's going to be a handful.
Yeah.
Yeah, just stay away from this guy's going to, this guy's going to be a friggin' like nightmare.
He's going to talk about therapy his first 5 minutes of meeting you, you know?
He's going to be calling into work with mental health days nonstop. He's going to be complaining about everything.
The ROI is just ticking down as we speak.
Right. So yeah, if you are trying to thrive in one of those worlds where like gay think is the fucking gay. Yeah, but whatever, like all that. No, yeah, but if you're in any other world, people just see that shit and they go, Jesus.
You seem like a guy that would really struggle in a normal job. Like, did you
so?
ever have, there's no way I can picture you wearing a suit and a tie and following the HR handbook and turning your report in by noon on Friday. Did you ever do a job like that?
No, ever since I finished college, I was doing this kind of stuff for the most part, and then like a part-time job here and there. But I have worked at I worked at the CBC. Well, I never worked there though. I kind of did TV shows, so it was always separate. Were you
as a journalist, or what were you doing?
No, doing like I did a web series, like a digital series there, and then actually did 2 digital series there, and then like some other content or whatever. But you're right, I was like making something for them. No, I worked at like the city. I worked for like at a hockey rink, and yeah, I didn't do a ton.
What was the most nonsense job you ever had?
I would say that working for the city is, I don't know if you've ever worked for the city, but like it's a pretty easy job because everyone there is kind of like, yo, we can do nothing.
You basically have to do like a school shooting to get fired there.
It's once you're full time. Part-time, they can fire you. Once you're full-time, it's very, very difficult to get you fired. So, and all of the older people that have been working there forever, they kind of have all the techniques of like, they're mad like, hey, you're working too hard. Like we have because if you know, you know, kind of how it's places have, if you don't spend your budget, they get mad at you because, you know, you're not going to get the budget the next year. They have that with work where very like, hey, if you have like someone that's like, you know, supposed to everyone mows 4 grasses and this guy does like 6. They're like, hey, buddy, like we're telling them that that's not possible. Like you're screwing us over here.
It seems like I've never met, I'm trying to think
you
of
legitimately get reprimanded for doing too much.
Yeah, like what is it about anything that's ran by the government that just sucks? Like
because they don't have anyone to account to.
Yeah, and the budget is always like, we're going to increase taxes, or we're going to get, it just is always out of line. Like any normal business, you would have fired people or you would have gone broke or bankrupt.
I mean, in the case of this, a lot of the things didn't even need to be done in the first place.
It was just busy work type of stuff?
So much busy work. Well, you know, you drive across town to go cut the hedge of a park that's never been attended in 20 years. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'm sure some, you know, the hockey arena, like a lot of the stuff's like real that does need to get done, but you probably just don't have as many people doing it.
So what kind of click for people that
But
know
in terms of having a job, what I was going to say was, I would say that I don't know if you were like this too, but it's always been hard for me to like care about someone else's thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, okay. So like I interviewed for jobs where you sell printers. I've done jobs where I'm selling payroll, or you're trying to do some sort of incentive structure. And like, there's these weird guys that are like, I remember interviewing with a boss that acted like he was a Navy SEAL, and like he shows up, he takes pre-workout at 4:30 a.m. He's checking his email. I just
nice.
I could never trick myself into he's got to be tricking himself to get excited about that. Like, at what point are you like, I'm not pumped about selling printers? You know what I mean? Like, how do you think people get into that track?
I think once you find the game you're playing, then you just play the game. You know what I mean? So if it's printers and you're just like, hey, like I'm on commission, I'm going to make as much as I can this year, as long as there's some incentive structure that you're sort of like working up, right? So I guess in the corporate, I've never probably been in a scenario where I've accepted that I'm playing this game. I'm always been like, this is a temporary thing. I'm here. I'm now actually going to be doing this. So I've never been able to like invest in like trying to win. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've kind of bullied myself. Like I've gone through stages of like trying to wear the logo and move forward and hit my quota and do all that. But like it always was temporary. It always would like fade out.
Okay. Did you ever think you were going to be there forever, or did you always kind of?
It was always like, I want to make money so I can save up to do my other shit.
So that's the problem, right? I think it's kind of like putting in a ton of effort into like a girlfriend that you like know that I'm going to be breaking up with her.
Yeah, I'm not even going to visit her parents.
Why am I doing all that stuff? I think to me it's that, right? It's like, why are you putting all this like investment into something that you really know that you're kind of exiting?
So do you think within everybody is this like, some guys want to write some poetry, some people are going to write their memoir, some people want to make a sculpture, and then somewhere along the lines, reality sets in and it gets squashed out? Or do you think there are people that are just like, you know what? I am going to be the fucking man when it comes to selling printers, and that's me.
Yeah, I have a little more of the second one where I don't really put like art on like some pedestal above other things, you know, especially anyone who's, I'm sure it's cool what you're doing, but like at the end of the day, you know, you're like, okay, making a schedule. We're doing this. Like we're booking the thing, booking plane tickets. Okay, we're going to do this video. It's like, yeah, there is like a creative element, but you are like kind of running a business the same as any other business. Sure. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's a cooler one, I guess, you know, which again, there's like in the cooler ones have less ROI, right? Like the cooler an industry is, the more competition there's going to be. So there's pros and cons, but I do think that there is people that are naturally way more like entrepreneurial in the sense that they want to run stuff. I do think there's people that are like, yo, I don't want to be like running a ship.
So, you know, like when we're kids, like we're told like everyone has a little light inside of them and someone's going to find a way to let their little light shine. Do you feel like that is the case, that we are born to create, we are born to have like our own little, whether you're the man at solving Rubik's Cubes or you knit sweaters and then like the world squashes it out of you, or just some people are like, the worker bee type, and it's just like they're content to have the stability, the schedule, not the risk of entrepreneurship, and they just want to.
So if you take it back to, you go like, so in your question, the idea is like, what is an actual human, right? And you go, do humans have something special artistically, right? Mm-hmm. So if you remove society and you go back to like caveman or whatever, like I think that there are humans that are more creative than others, and in the absence of like art. You know, back in the day when, you know, artists built cities and did stuff, and it's becoming more of that right now. Like artists are running companies and, you know, I think you're finding out that like art and how we think of creativity is not that different. Like, you know, if you're running a hedge fund and like thinking of creative ways to, you know, make money, that's not that different from thinking of creative ways to, you know, like talk about culture or, you know, to attack a joke. I really think that creativity, like in art, gets separated from just creativity, period. And I think they are kind of somewhat similar. I think that art in general to me is like often more of a composite skill in the sense that like the best like comedians and the best, filmmakers and what you're doing, like they're skills that are a combination of 20 other things. Like, you know what I mean? You're like kind of a likable guy. You have a good energy, but you have like a good work ethic. You understand how to build a team. Like you understand how to kind of run a team. Like you have like a vision for the future, but you're like kind of fearless, but also not like an idiot. Like, I don't know. I think it's like a composite of the right type of person that's good at that. And then whereas there might be some industries, like let's say, actuarial science, like it's not really a composite skill. It really is like this guy's the best at this one thing. So his creativity is way more like focused.
So maybe what I'm doing is I'm guilty of discounting certain types of art or ingenuity. Like for example,
I think everyone is.
If you are the best printer salesperson,
I had to interrupt you.
Yes.
It's not. In my theory wasn't that those are getting discounted. It's more that like this one's getting
on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Yes. Because if a guy can find, like, if you all talk to the same customers, but there's one guy that can figure out the way to word things in the right way, put his flyers in the right order, and really have the art of a salesman, that is a special thing that's within him, and that's how he expresses it, kind of a thing.
Dude, like, think about, Tim Dillon always talks about how he was, like, selling mortgages or whatever, right? Like, there's no question that some of those skills were the same skills that allowed him to, sell the ideas that he's selling on his podcast.
Yes.
Or some version of that, I'm doing essentially a lot of like sales techniques when I do street interviews, and so are you, Yeah. So all of it, I put a lot of it in the same category, but then you just become an expert at what that little like composite is. So to go back to does everyone have some spark of creativity? I think it's not binary. It's like, of course, everyone has some creativity. Like
it's a spectrum, a continuum where it's some more than others, but we all
have
a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. What's funny that I think Kermetzger said this when we were talking, but he was like, people like to say that everything that is actually a spectrum isn't a spectrum, and everything that isn't a spectrum is.
Let me boil that down first.
Like, okay, here's an example of what isn't, like, political stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like, are you left or right? Like, really, you're probably somewhere in there, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's an actual spectrum. And for that, they're like, no, you're this left or this. Right. So it's like all the things that are actually spectrums, they call them.
Just like gender.
Yeah, well, gender, like, the truth is, that one, say it's a spectrum, like, what they mean is masculinity is a spectrum.
Yes.
And that is a spectrum.
Of course.
Yeah. But, like, there's the actual like gender parts, probably not, but the masculinity and femininity is probably a spectrum. Yeah. Most things probably are a spectrum.
So my only idea of what it's like to be a kid in Canada is Gavin McInnes's book, where he talks about when he was a child.
How to Be in Public?
Yes. I love that book.
Yeah, that was a cool
That's book. One of the funniest books I've ever read in my life.
That's a perfect example of a guy that when you're talking about like advertising, right? Like
he's a marketer to his core.
Yeah, and that was a guy that was like an entertainer guy, but like transferred that into like running an ad agency or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's kind of cool.
So I know he was like in the punk rock scene. They were fighting Nazis and shit. What was it like growing up as a kid in Canada?
We were the Nazis fighting Gavin McInnes. I grew up in the suburbs right outside of Toronto, but the way that Americans think of suburbs is a little different than what suburbs are in Canada.
You were out in the bush?
No, it's not that. It's like suburbs in America, people describe, maybe in like around LA, it sort of describes more accurately. Mm-hmm. In California, I think it kind of makes sense what those suburbs are. But in America, like in New York, when people think of like suburbs of where I'm right now, they think of like richer, like when I like in Toronto, the richer people kind of live in Toronto. And then there's like a few suburbs that are really rich, but it's more like middle. Like suburbs are more like middle.
Yes.
And they're not like white. It's like probably fairly racial diverse outside of Toronto, at least anyway.
What kind of box would you put yourself in as a kid? Like
I was like a classic, like getting kicked out of malls, skateboarding, forming a band. Were you a punkish
kid, like always getting in trouble?
Getting in trouble, like skateboarding. I was in a band. Just like I was like a classic kind of like suburban Toronto kid.
So I have a great fear for children growing up now that they don't get to experience like the untethered wildness of what it is to really be a kid. Like I know when I was a kid, we'd ride our bikes to the woods.
Yeah.
Some kid had built like some haphazard fort that was like in kid stories, it was like 5 stories tall, but an adult maybe it was like 2 or 3. There's nails sticking out everywhere. You go to the top of the fort and you piss off the top, and like someone could easily have died. And then we were catching snapping turtles
That has to be
and
true,
stuff like
yeah.
that. You know what I mean? And like it felt like the last era that just like isn't gonna grow up with a tablet instead of actually like going outside and doing stuff.
Yeah, kind of, right?
Do you feel like we were the last samurais in that regard?
I think you're right on that, which is why it is like kind of a unique generation that you were the first like generation to like properly straddle both, you know? Like, I don't know how old you are. I assume I'm a
29.
little older than you. Yeah. But it is kind of a bummer. But on the other side, I guess, I don't know, like when I was young, I was like obsessed with like making videos and stuff. And if we had like actual, you know, we used to just go film these like insane pranks in high school or whatever. And you just literally actually have a camera, and the only way to watch it was to take the tape and then you'd like plug it into the TV, and you couldn't cut it. You could not kind of just watch it. Where if I had a phone, that would have been so cool. So I think we glamorize the good things more than we talk about the bad things. Like even the idea of, like, remember when you were talking about, you know, what you described, like, you know, the 4 friends on the bikes, like traveling to the woods. Do you know what I also remember is your friends like left without you that day. And then that's that. Your friends are gone and you don't know where they are.
And you just go home sad?
Yeah. You're at home. And like, for example, maybe, I don't know what it was. Like maybe you had to do something with your family, whatever it was. And now your friends went out like skateboarding or to the woods. And I guess you just get your bike and you're like, I'll ride around and try to find them. You call their houses. If they're not there, then you're just like, I guess all my friends are gone. Whereas now that's a text message. Where are you guys? Okay, I'll come meet you right now.
Yeah. I remember
So there's like positives. Imagine picking up, like, you know, remember how hard, like, you know, just like picking up girls as like a kid, like just the amount of stuff that goes into that. Do you know how easy that probably is with everyone has phones? Like that whole game is just like, you'll never have to experience like what it was to actually try to do all that hard stuff. So
Yeah,
maybe there's a positive to that. But
it is easy to romanticize your own past, isn't it?
yeah, it's very easy to like romanticize how much better it was. So
older generations are always doing that. Like I read, even like in the 1500s, like you read an excerpt. Like,
yeah.
The new age is so lazy. They don't know how to read poetry. They don't do X, Y. You know what I mean? Like, and then you look at it and you're like, oh, things turn out okay.
Right. So I'm not like a romanticized guy. So I'm whatever the opposite of that is. I'm like fairly. It's almost, there's 2 parts of it. Like one is that maybe I'm like, I don't like romanticize parts. I know that everything is like trade-offs, you know, there's some good and some bad. And then the second part is like, it's almost like irrelevant because it's happening. So, you know what I mean? Like the idea that technology is like moving at this level, like in the absence of a government kind of saying like, hey, no more technological advancement. This kind of is happening.
It's a treadmill that we can't hop off.
Yeah, a little bit. So to the point of kind of, I guess there is something to be said about, you do need to think a little more like as a parent about, hey, how do I make sure that, you know, they're learning these lessons? So I think the biggest one would be making sure your kids are in competitive things like sports and stuff like that.
Do you feel like your kids will miss out though if they don't have an opportunity to like fall off their bike into a pond and like get scuffed up and come back home and cry a little bit?
Well, they now have an opportunity to like accidentally do something embarrassing, like shit their pants, and then it's on camera for the rest of their life and their life's ruined. So they can cry for that reason. Dude, can you imagine cameras that stink?
Yeah, and like especially how serious middle school kids would take that.
It's just a new game, you know? I think that they're part of it too. And maybe you're right. Maybe I'm wrong. And it's probably, you know, like a spectrum for this also. Sure. But we also, because we're the middle generation that, you know, sort of grew up a little bit without phones and then they kind of caught on the scene, whatever. Because of that, we also didn't know how to deal with it as much. Like if it was always there, it's like a little, I bet you phones like mess us up a little more than someone that was always had it.
Yeah, because we just they know how to navigate it, whereas we had to learn.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a drug, right? And that drug that's like bad for you, it would be kind of, imagine a civilization that like never had sugar, and then at like everyone's like 20 and you just go to like some tribe and introduce sugar at like 20, it'd probably be like terrible for that society, right?
Just like alcohol for the Indians.
100%.
Yeah.
Whereas if you always had it, not to say but it's not as bad, you know? And I think that millennials are sort of the that for phones. We never had technology, so I think it messed people up. Like, I think millennials became, you know, on the internet yelling at you people. Like, anyone that didn't have phones, like the worst probably is boomers with Facebook. That's probably like the worst culprits of like a psychopath. Millennials, you know.
Typing in all caps some sort of rant that's just undecipherable and also horrendous.
Exactly. Either, you know, just either just like the most insufferable CNN mom of all time, or just like straight up QAnon, like Trump's coming back. Nutcase, not realize, you know, accidentally posting like satirical memes, accidentally posting your porn on, yeah, just nutcases, right? So that's the worst version of it. Millennials kind of, you know, nonstop arguing and calling people offensive, all that is probably like the second worst. And I bet you that the people, the next generation now will be better.
I have a question about porn for you, but first, Keegan, I just realized the chicken is still in the oven. You want to put that on the top, but what do you think about kids nowadays navigating porn? Because now they're going to be...
I don't think the kids should be in porn.
I think that's a good...
That's my stance.
I think that's... I don't know. I think that's a reason.
You must be a water too, by the way.
But, okay, how old were you when you first saw porn?
Well, I was like a child porn actor, but...
You went to Epstein's Island for some freelance work?
Yeah, I went to Epstein's Island as a kid to work. So yeah, that's probably, I mean, that's another one where we like romanticize, like having a photo. Remember back in the day having like a one photo or something? Like, I don't know if you had something like that. Dude, I had one nude photo that I'd printed off a computer that I used to fold it back up and hide in my bedroom.
Dude, that was like... It was one of the most intoxicating things ever. Was
best,
like
dude.
Having some shitty like 360p resolution photo that just had tits. And
I know.
That you would like, dude, you would like literally put your entire day on hold, or like if you were in school, like you would just think about going home so you could just see a little bit more.
Yeah, you're just like, when you figured out jerking off, that took over for a few months, that's for sure. Then you get it under control.
A few months? How about a few years, buddy? That was a substantial period.
But still, yeah, kind of takes over, but maybe not as bad.
I think, I wonder, I don't want to be the guy that the sky is falling. But I do, like I talked to a gentleman yesterday, won't have kids because he thinks it's too much of not a dangerous world. His thing was climate change. He's not going to have kids, which I think is a little bit of a weenie reason to not have kids.
Corny.
But do you want kids?
Yeah, I'll probably have kids at some point, but I've lived like somewhat of a fairly unconventional life, so
I'd say so.
There's no real problem with me having kids at any sort of age. You know what I mean? Sometimes I do get wrapped up in the like, okay, this at this age and this at that, but like generally when I'm more leveled, it doesn't really matter that much. Like I try to, like it's very easy to think things matter so much, but they also don't. You know?
Yeah, it's like. On one end, everything we do is incredibly significant and it can have such a big impact on people. But on the other end, nothing really matters, and one day we'll all be bones.
Yeah, it's whether you zoom in or out, right? Like whether you kind of, you know, zoom out and you're like, we're all just specks of dust and nothing matters, or where you zoom in and you're the most important thing in the world and every little decision matters, right?
Indeed.
But I think as you get older too, that's why I always think like 25 to 30 is kind of the hardest age for dudes, because it's very like, wow, what am I doing? And then at 30, it's a little bit like, all right. I think post 30, you realize you're like, it doesn't matter that much. It doesn't matter what I do. And also, you've watched it crumble on both sides. I think at 25, you're watching like a lot of people start to get jobs and, you know, start to put together families or whatever. And you're like, and it's all very exciting, right? 30s when they all start to, you know, kind of lose those jobs and get divorced, whatever. You know what I mean? You start to see the other side of it. Now you have a friend that has a nightmare, you know, situation with his ex-wife, or he has a kid that he can't get custody, or you see and then you just realize like there is no right answer. There's all scenarios can lead to bad things. So I think that try to, you know, make the right move at the right time.
I also think that when you're in your 20s, the dating scene is heavily slanted towards the woman. They really have the power
Of course.
in the scene. But the older you both get, the man has much more pull, because all these women that are getting close to their birthing age, so to speak, like they're realizing, holy shit, like I was with all these like frat douchebags for years, and now I have to actually find someone that's stable, that's going to take care of me, that's going to do. Now all of a sudden they're coming to the man, versus we spent all this time chasing after people, and it just was kind of a disaster.
I think that's very accurate. Yeah. And then on top of that, when you're 25, you're competing with 35-year-olds, right? Like, and when the girls are 35, they're competing with 25-year-olds. So it's the vice versa. Like the dating pool, when you're a 35-year-old woman, you're competing for a smaller pool of guys. And when you're a 35-year-old man, you're actually competing for a bigger pool of girls than you were at 25. So it's like straight up supply and demand. It got easier for you.
Economics 101, right?
Like literally is.
So, okay.
Dude, do you not remember being like 21 and like talking to 21-year-old girls, and they're like, yeah, she's dating some 29-year-old that's like has more money, his life's together more, he's probably better at like sex and stuff. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're just competing. They're like legitimately, they look like men, whereas like, I don't know, like a lot of 21-year-old dudes, you're still like kind of like scrawny, like kid or whatever. I mean, I still am, but you know what I mean?
How old were you when you feel like you actually figured out chicks and how to navigate that scene?
I mean, figure it out is a push, but I was always like fine with chicks or whatever, because I was like kind of popular in a band, like in a popular band or whatever.
And that was a draw for the...
I mean, I was just always probably like in a group of guys that was fairly good with women, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
you weren't a late bloomer in any regards for women?
I mean, in high school, my group of friends wasn't that girl oriented. Like we were very much like 20 dudes that was way more into sort of like dude stuff, if that makes sense. Like still causing trouble, getting in fights, like whatever, playing sports. But like it wasn't, my group of friends was like a fairly, I guess you would say popular group of friends, but not crazy pussy crazy, if that makes sense. Like none of us.
So
it just wasn't like the dynamic. So I definitely wasn't like girl crazy in high school. I would say maybe like girls sort of took over the world for everyone, like moving into like college and beyond then. But
do you remember with your crew?
Depends on what you're talking about. Like I'm obviously, when you're 21, you're still worse at girls. But no, I wasn't, like I'm not a shy person or whatever. Like I didn't have that kind of problems.
It sounded like you guys were up to a lot of tomfoolery and shenanigans. Like, is there a particular stunt or prank you remember pulling that was like, hell yeah, like this is a Hall of Fame level prank?
I was just so into pranks from the get-go. I was like, one of the first things we ever did was, I remember we would like steal our parents' cars when we were like 14 or 15, and then do a 20-point turn in front of like the city bus, and just like these huge lineups, and we like film that. So we used to film all this kind of like wild stuff like that. Then we would go to, we had a pretty good one where we go to like jewelry stores, and then we would ask them for stuff that didn't exist, and then be like, hey, listen, I'm like here to buy. If you can't make the sale, whatever. We said like that kind of stuff. Then I sort of started making all these DVDs, kind of like, you know, messing around and doing like crazy pranks. Like we would pretend we were like break dancers, and then go into the mall and like put cardboard down and break dance in the mall. Kind of wild, like wild teenager stuff. Then I started doing that as like a cable access TV show in Canada. And then I was doing really crazy stuff there where we were like very much like bothering businesses and stuff like that.
Is there an example you can give?
I'll tell you the one that I had this show on Bite TV that almost got taken off the air, got taken off for like 2 weeks because it was going to get sued. This is when I was like 26 or whatever, right? But we did this bit where we were going to fashion designers, like big ones, like, you know, like Ben Sherman. That's a big, I'm trying to think of like what's an American one. It was called Harry Rosen, I believe it was called.
Sounds fancy.
Yeah, pretty like fancy brands or whatever that have a big, you know, big like stores in Midtown or whatever, right? And then I was going into the CEO's office, and I was like pretty good at getting myself into those. So I would kind of go in and I'd be like, hey, I'm just here to see so-and-so. Like he should know we have a meeting, like blah, blah, blah. And they'd be like, oh, okay. I'd be like, I used to go, he's a friend of my dad's. So I knew that okay. he knows I'm coming. If you just tell him Ryan's coming for the Python pants, and they would be like, what? And then he would kind of go in, and I would just sort of like follow them in with the cameras. And then I would go, like I used to, and then we'd go to his office and I had this briefcase and it was selling these pants and they're called Python pants and they have like a big like fake dick to basically make your dick look bigger, and they were called Python pants, and I would pull them out and the guy's like, who are you? And we basically like ambush the CEO of these like huge companies selling these Python pants, right? And we did this to like 3 or 4 places, and it was like for this episode, and then as soon as it aired, I guess the company got wind of it, and then we had faces blurred and all this stuff, and then basically they were like, we're gonna sue, you have to take it down. The network like took it down, and they we're canceling the next episode come out, and it was my first big like scandal or whatever of that sort of thing. So that was awful.
Did your scandal actually increase viewership though?
No, it was like a crappy Canadian TV show that like none of those shows matter that much. But no, it was kind of the opposite. It was like no one cared. It was just like basically I had this like show that was like debuting. It was like episode 1, like it was pretty good. People were kind of watching it. And then episode 2 basically immediately came out and they we're suing the network, and the network got scared and was like, okay, we're taking it down until further notice. We don't know what we're doing. And it was like, no one wrote about it or anything. It was just like my show just got taken away.
Man, it's so fun to pull those audacious pranks. Like I remember a couple of my favorite. One would be, so I loved different costumes. Like whenever I had a different costume.
I love a costume too.
Because you could just put yourself in the shoes and you act like that guy. So like,
especially when I was young, I loved a costume.
I literally had a closet full of just like different disguises and shit. One of them was like scrubs. And so like, I remember one time I was going around offering people free colonoscopies and shit like that. But another one is I had a fake ball sack and I had ice. I ran into a grocery store. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's lost his ball sack. We got to put it on ice. So I got people from behind the meat counter to scoop out ice and put it into a little bag. And it caused a havoc, dude. Like I think ambulances were called, but it was just like...
Yeah, you did funny pranks.
There's something just so fun about the running and gunning of just like thinking of an idea that makes you laugh. Like I would always think about it before I would go to sleep.
How young were you when you started doing all that kind of prank stuff?
I mean, from my earliest prank age, I remember like setting up an electric mouse and I'd invite kids over from the neighborhood to play a computer game and then catch the reaction when I zap
Would
them.
you film it?
Yes.
Who was your big guys that you were into with
the
like
Dudesons
on the street stuff? So you, okay. Interesting. Yeah, you did some of the similar stuff to me. So Dudesons were huge for you. I like Jackass.
Jackass too.
Tom Green was like, to me, the #1 guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I also thought like Sacha Baron Cohen was really good.
I just rewatched an episode of the Dudesons.
Dudesons were cool. I could see why you like them. Yeah.
So fun, so crazy. But then I was like, when I rewatched it, one thing I thought was like, I think these guys are like 35 in this right now. Like I was watching it as like a preteen.
Dudesons were that young, yeah.
So, but they just would cause havoc, and I think like the idea that you can just
Australians are wild too.
Is there a group out of there that stands out like the Dudesons to you?
Wait, where are those? Aren't the Dudesons
They're from
Australian?
Finland. They're from Finland.
Oh. Same thing.
Yeah. Just a bunch of wild whites.
I just knew they were from somewhere over there.
Would you ever launch a TV show again where it's like a hidden camera, like Eric Andre's Bad Trip? Was that he came out with on Netflix?
You mean like a movie?
Yeah, a movie.
Yeah, I've thought about it, but I really think that the problem with that is I have a lot of people that kind of, are trying to give me some money to do a movie or whatever, but like
I'll give you $50 right now.
Thank you. So there's another one to add to the pile. I just don't see, I don't know if you like would ever want to do a documentary, but like think about your business you're running right now, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say if you did a documentary, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, like then what? Like, would that help? I don't know.
Oh, I want to sell them to Netflix. Too.
Well, what if you don't then? Like, then you just wasted 6 months of your life, So yeah, it would be good to make a documentary and sell it, but if not, like you just stepped away from your business that's working on a lottery ticket. And to me, a part of...
You don't think you can guarantee like, hey man, this is my work, that I'm a comedian, blah, blah, blah. If I lock in XYZ for you, we got.
You think you can guarantee that? Oh, you're saying sell it beforehand.
Is that naive? I don't know.
No, I mean, yeah, people can do that. I mean, I don't think that's happening to me, but yes, I would, if I sold a movie beforehand, but that's not really like how the independent film world works, really.
See it and bid on it and.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like if this is a big major studio picture, but like that's, to me, that doesn't seem like in the question. So I'm talking about the like independent film world. And to me that, I just don't see it. You know what I mean? Like, how, as a whole picture, I just don't see it. So.
Well, I guess is it part of it because you have your foot on the gas between comedy and podcast that's taking all of your time, and it takes like you're on the big time come up, and that part of life only happens like once in a lifetime. Sometimes if you don't manage that come up properly, it may never come around again.
That's a huge point. So that's like I think this is even a better way to describe it. It's like it's pretty easy to come up with reasons why not, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that I can come up with a million reasons why not to step away from your business that's like working really well, that takes a lot of time and energy to put your 6 months into something else, right? So that's the obvious part, but like I still don't really have a reason for why. Like why would I?
Because you would make me laugh and laugh.
Because I want to, right?
Yeah.
So the only why is because I want to. So it's essentially like we're talking about a passion project, and it's like, I don't know, like I've done lots of passion projects. My whole life's a passion project in some sense. Like I love doing stand-up comedy. I love, making videos. I love and one of them's like a more uphill battle. So I don't know, like.
Is it almost like maybe in 5 years you can revisit it? Like once things are like.
I would revisit it tomorrow if I saw a pathway that it made sense in my mind. Like that's the thing. I have a lot of people that have offered money. They're like, hey, let's make a movie or whatever. But I'm like, and then what? Like, so I spend the time, I make the movie. Then what?
And the other shit comes to a screeching halt because you can't keep it going as fast.
Yeah, potentially. It's like, I don't need capital. I'm like, my issue isn't really like, I need more money. My issue is like, I would love to make a movie that people see. And then on top of that, like, okay, when you're making something for Instagram, you probably make it different than when you're making it for YouTube, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do you make a movie when you don't know who the audience is and you don't know where it's going, right? So you essentially, by nature, would have to make it more broad than you would. Like if I knew a movie was going to go on Netflix, I know how people are viewing that. I know what that looks like. If I knew it was going to be on the film festival circuit, I would make a way crazier movie because I have to make attention, So on top of that, we don't really know what we're doing. Like it's like you making this piece of 20-minute content and you're not sure if it's going to go on Facebook, YouTube, or get chopped up into bits. So it's on top of that, it's like very difficult for me to like make a comedy when I don't know where it's going to go. Cause I would make a way wilder, if I was making a comedy that was going to go like kind of behind a paywall, I would make something insane and low budget. If I was going to make something that was going to go to Netflix, I would work really hard on the same way I do with stand-up, where it's like, sometimes on podcasts, you're talking to niche audiences and you don't really need to, introduce the topics. If I would do something more niche, if I was going to be making a movie that was like a studio picture, like Netflix, I would go more broad and I would explain topics from first principles more. So, normal people would understand what I'm talking about, not just assume my fans who kind of know me. Right. So it's all different. But then if you make a movie that's for your fans and you make a very broad like picture, your fans are just going to think you're like kind of sold out. Right.
Yeah.
So how do you strike that balance without knowing where a piece of content's going? To me, that's like a huge part that doesn't make sense. So I think that if I had where it was going, I would do anything. But like, I think that there's just puzzle pieces that aren't there. And for me to start to be like, well, we'll figure that out as we go. Like, I'm just kind of like not how I operate anymore.
Well, I will say this, if it ever
does that make sense?
Yeah. If it comes to fruition and you ever need a doctor in a bit, I still have the scrubs. But I guess let me ask you this. Is there a piece of your content that you would say you've gotten the most pushback, most angry people? Because I think you take a little bit of delight in making people that are easily offended angry.
Anything political obviously gets a lot of pushback. Like anything where you kind of, talk about anything that people think affects politics, because people are like really, really hyped up, right? So if they think
it's the new religion, it feels like.
Right. So the same reason that if you're, super into a law and someone makes a thing that's pushing back against that and you see that as like hurting your message, like you're like, this guy needs to be stopped, right? So that's how people see it. But that's like normal. And I to be honest, I think like if you're going to enter the like political cultural sphere, you're going to get pushback. That's just like the game. But the funny part is, to me, when you make fun of something that was unexpected. Like I did a video about Will Smith, and like to this day, I still like, you every now and then you open up your apps and see comments. Like, I don't know how much you do that, but like every now and then I'll see like 3 or 4 comments a day still about like this Will Smith video I made.
And what's the feedback?
They hate me. Like Will Smith, like I've like made aggressive things about like trans people and not nearly as much pushback as like this video, like kind of like calling Will Smith a bitch, like when all the thing was happening. Basically, I made a video when all the Will Smith stuff was happening, And you remember how they kept going on? I actually just watched Chris Rock's special last day, and he was talking about this again. But basically, when they were going on the press tour, and then they kept talking about how Jada was with all the other men and all that sort of stuff. And it was like weird, right? And I made a video that it was like the 4 or 5 other guys that had sex with Will Smith's wife telling Will Smith to like hang in there. It was like, because he was having a bad day, and it was like giving Will Smith a pep talk from the guys that are banging his wife. And it was like, whatever. That was, and the gist was like the plumber, like, hey, Will, like, just big fan. Just yesterday, I was like having sex with your wife, Jada, and she was telling me you were in a bad like mood. Actually, I also meant to ask you, those cabinets that I was banging her on, are those oak? They're really nice. Like, whatever. That was the gist of the video. I've honestly probably did like 10 million views across platforms, and I get so much people being like, you think, like some people it's like racist, even though like half the people in the video are black, but like some people it's like racist that a white guy would even like dare to make fun of Will Smith. A lot of people were like, you could never talk about a man's marriage that way. A lot of people were just like, look at you mother, like, you know what I mean? Just very, so one thing I've noticed this a while ago when I saw one of my buddies who was in a fight with like Nicki Minaj fans or whatever, stan culture is almost like more aggressive than like social justice stuff, like in some ways.
I guess because you're ripping down their hero. If they're in that stan category.
Yeah, that's their religion.
Yes.
But like, I guess I knew that like with artists sort of thing, like you go, I'm like, I kind of get that like Justin Bieber has fans like that. Like I didn't really get that like Hollywood actors have like, I didn't get that where you go, I'm just like diehard Morgan Freeman guy. Like, do you know what I mean?
I'm
like,
trying to picture that person in my head.
Me too. I've never really met them, but Will Smith just has these legions of fans that are like, can't believe someone would have the audacity to make fun of him. And to me, that's crazy. I can see it with athletes even. Like I could see as like, yo, someone that's like so diehard, like Steph Curry fan, like, yo, you can't talk shit. You know what I mean?
The wildest part about the athlete worship is like, okay, so I saw that a lot of this in the office setting. Like guys that did nothing for themselves, but if you dare talk about Aaron Rodgers the wrong way, like they'd want to fight you. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
What do you think that is?
Well, with him specifically, it kind of got political.
Let's just say like insert local star.
Okay, so you didn't mean him, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. Yeah, like I guess that what you mentioned about the religion, you know, your city's team, for a lot of people, that's religion. Like, to be honest, in Canada, like where I'm from, I would say, you know, a lot of people now, politics like really is their religion. Like, you know, like whatever, you know, Hillary Clinton's their God or whatever, right? I knew way more people that their God was the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah, like, so I feel like I do kind of, I get the sports stan culture more, to be completely honest. And it's so just ingrained in everything. Like if you're a football family, it's like through and through. The same way that if you're a hockey family, it's like your kids play hockey, you know, the hockey's such a huge part of your like world, you know?
Do you feel like, because one thing is almost everything you make fun of, I'm glad someone makes fun of, and I think it needs to be done. Do you ever feel like the people that start following you, like you have to stay away from, like if Trump did something crazy, you can't really make fun of it because the people you normally insult are on the other side. Like you feel like you're...
Well, you have to fight that at every step.
Yeah.
So you're right. If that's called audience capture, and people do definitely fall prey to that. But the truth is, I think one of the things is I'm not 20, right? Like I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I understand like cultural trends, and I understand like at no point was I like, oh, the left's being crazy, that means the right's good.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So I was making fun of them every step of the way, and I've also every step of the way, whether that's on my podcast, on videos, like I'm always saying like, yo, I'm not here to be like your internet dad, your internet hero. Like I don't care about your cause. Like I'm here to make like funny videos and be entertaining. Like if you think that because you agree with me on this one thing that I'm here to like, you know, some people, as soon as you say something anyone agrees with, right? They go, I mean, look at Jim Jeffries. He made like one joke about like guns and he became like the anti-gun guy, right? So you have to fight that every step of the way. It's like this crust that is like dark arts, right? You know that, yeah, of course there was a market for for any comedian to just be like, actually, I like Trump. You know what I mean? But I would never do that. I've never voted. I would never tell people who to vote for. So I think that's like a constant thing that you want to fight. I mean, it's not, if you remove like the politics, everything has this. Like think about like music, right? If you're like a rock band that kind of sits in metal, right? Like, do you say, I'm this metal band and you become part of that metal culture and then you gain fans faster, but now you can't do anything else. Like if you do want to be like, you know what, I want to go make this song. Everyone's like, you're fucking sellout. Like you're a sellout to the genre. Like, so as soon as you want to join this like group of people, the only group of people that I'll ever join is comedians. So I do say like, I'll be willing to fight the fight that comedians are fighting as a whole, and also just inherit the enemies that comedians have as a whole. I'll be willing to do that with nothing else.
So you've gotten to the stage of the career where you're touring, you're doing a lot of just like, you're really making it happen. Like you're living in a lot of people's dream. Like there's people that probably would kill somebody to be in your shoes.
Well, you too, right? I guess, yeah.
Yes. And so how does it feel? And also where do you see like the New York scene going? Like it seems like it was described yesterday as like kind of the mecca of the comedy scene.
Yeah, best place in the world.
Describe it for the people that aren't familiar.
So Hollywood is still Hollywood, you know?
Gay.
Very gay, very Hollywood. But
you got to know somebody and you might have to touch a studio producer's balls to get the role.
You got to know someone, you got to say all the right stuff, you know, whatever, right? But Hollywood still, people are more famous. That's where the celebrities are. That's where they make movies. Culture still happens there, even if it happens other places. The same way that, you know, Silicon Valley is still Silicon Valley. You know, yes, there's a lot of people that, and this is, you know, New York's still Wall Street. Yes, there's people that are, you know, big traders that live other places, but it's not New York, you know? So New York's the center of the world for stand-up comedy. There's, you know, 35 stand-up comedy clubs here. Like the Comedy Cellar is probably the best club in the world. So the best comedy in the world, like the best comedians, the best comedy in the world is happening in New York. Hollywood there's a lot of the best comedians moved there, and there is still a scene of comedians that kind of came up in the LA scene. The same way that music always has, like Dirt Nasty and those guys, kind of like Hollywood rap. There's always like a little Hollywood scene. Like there were a lot of like 80s bands, there was like a Hollywood scene. But most scenes take place other places. Hollywood has its own scene like anything else. But most of the people in Hollywood are from other places, you know what I mean? Especially in comedy. Most of those people there like were part of a different comedy scene, then moved there. You know,
how long did it take to feel like you broke through?
So I moved to America 3 years ago-ish. To break through America, I had a fairly aggressive plan for America that worked pretty good. I kind of just did the same thing. Like in Canada, I did make a living. Like I had TV shows. I had kind of like I had a little film studio in Toronto, and I had a life and I had a house and whatever. But it's smaller scale. It's Canada, right? It doesn't matter. So my plan was to move to America. I knew that if I moved to Hollywood, it's kind of the stuff we were saying, like no one would care how good I was at comedy. But New York, I knew that I was part of this little scene in Toronto, and I kind of like invented a new way of like a little style of doing comedy that no one was doing. And I kind of knew how audiences were seeing that. And I knew when I moved to New York, I would get passed everywhere. So I got passed at all the clubs like really quickly, and then just did all the stuff I was doing on my TV shows and digital series. I'd built up like 2 or 3 digital brands doing comedy videos that weren't mine. So then I just moved to America. I just did that for myself now. Because
what was the new style you invented?
So, you know, the best way to describe, I don't know if you can, like, do you know British humor? Like, do you follow British comedy?
I've watched Monty Python once. Does that qualify me?
Yeah. Monty Python. So Canada in a lot of ways is like a mix between British and American humor. So I think that the style I would describe as like very satirical, very at a time when like satire wasn't as heavy, very punchline driven, but like British punchline driven. So very kind of throwing away punchlines in like a satirical way. So and it was a time when like culture and stuff was very heavy. So it was sort of like a way to interface with this stuff. Here, I could put it in
Because right now it's like, bloody hell, what are you talking about, mate?
Yeah, well, it's a comedy thing. I'll give you a perfect example, right? So in America, like, let's say we were talking about like, let's say you wanted to say like sassy gay dudes are annoying, right? In like 2016, like that's a tumultuous point, right? So a Bill Burr, a Chris Rock, which is very like American in my opinion, would say, you know, the thing is, you know, I don't care. Like, gay guys are a little bit annoying. Am I crazy? Like, I'm just saying. And they would sort of pitch their case to you of why, like, you've never seen one gay guy. I'm not saying every single one, but a guy comes in here a little bit. That's not a little, whatever, right? Does that make sense? That's would be like, in my opinion, like very like American. You'd pitch your case of something that's like tumultuous to agree with, right? I was sort of doing a version of more like, okay, do you guys know how gay guys are annoying? And then they'd pull back. I go, okay, you're right. Gay guys aren't annoying. Okay, anyways, whatever, moving on. It was like a little more hypnosis driven where I'm saying that something that's, come on, we all think this is a little true. And then they say no. And then I move on and then made them sort of question like why they got offended and I don't care. So it's like, I basically took their outrage and like made it clear that I didn't care and then turned, in a way, I think you sort of like turn the people who are cool against the people who aren't cool. And that's how you sort of like, I mean, I didn't invent like a lot of these things you didn't invent. It's just, you're like, you
put your own spin on it. No,
it's a combination of different things and my personality. And also I was like this is like 2016 where it was like white guys are kind of bad. And I was doing the like, doing like a I'm better than you act at a time when like, you're supposed to be the hated one. So it's like a combination of cultural factors that kind of, you know, put together and you just find something that kind of works. And then after 6 or 7 years of you guys all doing this thing, you kind of invented something that like your little pocket, just the same way that, you know, a bunch of bands kind of sound the same way in Seattle or the bunch of, you know what I mean? My little crew of people.
Just like youth pastors, all have the same like pattern of talking, the way they dress, like they're so cool, but they're cool for God. But it's like, what are you doing, dude? But yes, I know exactly like each little culture, like wrestlers tuck their socks into their sweatpants for some reason. Like it just comes about.
They develop and then, these cultures develop. And so, so like the Philadelphia guys all have like a certain style. Like they're all into like a way that I think that style is getting very popular. And I think it's like really cool.
Where's that like a little bit more in your face?
Do you know Shane Gillis?
Yes.
Like that would be like, to me, like a good example of like a modern like Philly guy style.
So who is someone who's someone that's really turning your head right now where you're like, maybe in the MMA world you would say like Sugar Sean O'Malley or like the Conor McGregor, like who is someone that just like shot out of a cannonball, you're like, holy shit, I can't believe this guy's doing this.
Stand-up?
Or just in the, like someone that's making people laugh. It could be stand-up, it could be a little outside that sphere.
There was, it's kind of, I guess, there's this, it's sort of somewhat of a weird question in that like, there isn't, in stand-up, no one comes out of nowhere that often. You know what I mean? It's
from the outside, it seems like it, but exactly. If you're inside, it's like, this guy's been hustling for 4 years.
And because I'm tapped in.
Yeah.
No one feels out of nowhere to me.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Because I'm so tapped into that world. You know what I mean? Like it's like if you were in the UFC, like, and you're like, no one seems like they came out of nowhere. You kind of found out about this guy. So there's a lot of people that I sort of like pay attention to that they're like impressive. So there's like young guys like, do you know like the 1 minute talk show guys or whatever?
Is that Side Talk NYC?
No. There's like this guy, Aiden, who I do some videos with. The guy's like 22 years old and he's like very impressive to me for how young he is. You know what I mean? So a lot of times there's that where you're just like, you're like, oh, I'd bet on this guy. He's like a really funny guy. Or like, and then there's the ones where they're like friends of mine. Like, you know, like Kyle Dunnigan and Kurt Metzger were like making these sketches together and they're like friends of mine. I think they're both so funny. And that was like stuff that was coming out where I'm just like, these guys are making such funny stuff.
So, okay.
Yeah, so that would kind of, but yeah, it's hard for me to say like a specific stand-up that came out of nowhere because most of the people that I'm like, I find right now, I'm like, these guys are the best. Yeah, I saw them. Like even like the big guys, like I can, like think about like Nate Bargatze, who became like the biggest, you know, one of the biggest like, you know, arena acts right now. Like I can remember the first time I kind of saw him come on the scene and you're like, oh, this guy's kind of good. And then you kind of see them blossom. And then as they get, there's something about stand up where like a lot of times you then get more popular, which adds to the confidence, and then you are able to like push it further. And it's, you know what I mean? A lot of times people's growth involves their kind of popularity that adds to their ability to be confident too.
So you said once
sort of a runaround answer.
Once you got off the Mayflower and you immigrated to the States, that you had an aggressive 3-year plan. Walk people through that? Because I think
I sort of had an aggressive, like immediate plan, but yeah.
Like, how did you divide and conquer here?
So to me, stand-up is stand-up is a good one because and this is one of the reasons I got into it in the first place, is that stand-up comedy is the only art form, in my opinion, that you like. There might be a guy that's the best artist in the world, right? That's undiscovered, that he might be the best in the world and you don't really know. Or there might be a guy that's like, or a woman that's like the best singer in the world, you know, and that's why American Idol, there's like a singer that goes on and it's like this, how are they so good and no one knew about them?
And they were just some Iowa waitress serving coffee. Yeah,
that doesn't exist in stand-up comedy. There's no such thing as that. Do you know what I mean? The same way that like, there's also no like the best basketball player in the world, but we never heard of him. Does that make sense?
Never played a game.
Yeah. Well, if he's never played a game, then he's probably not the best basketball player in the world, right? That you're describing someone that maybe could have been the best basketball player in the world, but he's not. Like if you haven't played a game, he's definitely not. He probably sucks at basketball.
Probably terrible.
He has the skill set to be that, but the same way there's lots of people that maybe are really funny and potentially have the skill set to be a great comedian, but they're not. Of course, they've never done it. So I think that's why this one art form is different than every other one. Even videos, like, you know, the truth is like you're making videos for a long time and then one thing just clicks. Like, did you get better that day? Like, no, not really, right? So I think that stand-up's the one thing that if you are really, really good at stand-up, like you actually can, that is enough, you know? So when people move to New York, and if you are really good, like you'll audition, everyone will notice it, everyone will help you. Like when people see it, some people won't, you know, there's people
gravitate towards greatness though. You want to be around somebody that's making moves.
Yeah, a lot of people will. Like a lot of people will hate you. Like a lot of people will hate like a new good person on the scene, but a lot of people will like it. So in my opinion, like stand up is the whole thing is if you want to be a stand-up comedian, like none of it matters until you get good at stand-up comedy. Get good at stand-up comedy to where you showed up anywhere and like the good stand-up comedians would be like, yo, who are you? What's your name? You know what I mean? The same way that like, think of it a basketball court where if like legitimate, you know, people on the Knicks were messing around and you showed up and played with them, they would be like, yo, who are you? You know what I mean? And when you have that, then you get in, now you're in the mix. And like you said, it's a small, same with YouTube. And like, we know each other because it's a small little world of people that are actually kind of making it work. And the same way stand-up's a small little world. Everyone sees you 5 times a day. They know how good you are. They know. So if you can get that figured out, then you move to New York, Austin or whatever, Los Angeles. That's the easiest way. But for me, then the other part of that plan was that I'd built up social media sites. I'd built up, I knew how to like go viral with videos and I knew how to make videos. And I've been doing that for 15 years. So I was like, let me kind of use stand-up to kind of get in the scene a little bit, be able to sort of get in the mix where people sort of start to know my name, do some podcasts, get some audience. And then once I kind of built that up to 10, 15K, I knew that now that people were paying attention, I could make videos that would go viral.
Do you remember the first video?
And then obviously being like a little bit fearless to make a little more noise than you when you're first like kind of coming on the scene, I guess.
Is there any topic that you did a stand-up bit on that you were like actually scared on stage before you said it because you're like, oh God, this might not be going over well?
Stand-up, not so much, because it's like I really work on if I was going to do something like really wild that I was like stressed out about, I would do that in a super comfortable environment. Do you know what I mean?
Like an open mic kind of room, or?
Well, a comedy club that like I'm one of the main guys at. Like, it doesn't matter how good I do. Like, if those audiences complain, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm in a safe environment to work on stuff. So if I was doing like if I was doing some big comedy show with all these people, I wouldn't be trying some random thing, you know? So it's stand up in that sense isn't scary because.
Have you ever had people complain to the manager to not book you again because you're too much?
Of course.
And where does that conversation go like?
So there's this, most comedy club owners, that's like everything, you kind of need like, I'm sure that when you have a probably crew with you that like you guys are comfortable around each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever like worked with someone that it kind of feels like you don't really know them that well, or maybe they feel like they don't want to be there. They're looking at their watch and it makes you like worse at what you do.
Yes.
I feel like comedy's like that. Like you need to find like a
crew
for making comedy, like videos. Like I definitely don't want anyone there that like has like, I like to have a vibe, right?
Mm-hmm.
But stand up too. It's like you need a club that you need to find places you can do stand up where you're not like, if I screw this up, then I'm fired.
You're toast.
Yeah, because then you'll never be able to get, that's not a place you can get better at. That's a place you can showcase at.
So basically,
so separating showcasing and getting better.
You have places that, as your act is established, this is where you go out and kick ass, but then you also have like the incubator areas.
1,000%.
Like, this is my laboratory. I get to experiment a little bit. And if the experiment goes wrong, well, I show up again
and then there's levels of it, right? And they depend on how popular you are, right? So you're like, if you're like this popular, you're like, hey, these ones above that I'm doing, like you might say, oh, the Comedy Cellar is the kind of, I'll do a joke that, for me, I would say, I have my places I go to say stuff for the first time. And then I have my places I go where I say stuff, okay, if it worked a couple times. Then I have my places I go where I say that like only things that work. And then you kind of take that act on the road. And then you sort of take that hour on the road, and then now you're doing your hour, and then it starts to build a little bit. You start to add stuff. And then sometimes you add too much stuff, and then you take it back and do that at the Comedy Cellar, and you're like, was this just working because I was like in front of my fans on the road, or is it actually good? And then you kind of refine it again backwards that way. That's kind of like my system.
One thing that really stands out to me about your life is you've really kind of marched to the beat of your own drum and proved that life is kind of one grand adventure and experiment that you really can. There is no rule book. You threw it out the window and you kind of made it happen. And isn't that a wonderful thing to experience and to know?
Yeah, it is kind of like, I don't know. I don't know if you think about this or go back and forth on this, but like a part of me is just like, yeah, I'm like, you're kind of marching to beat your own drum. The other part of me is like, I don't know, you're just like running a comedy business, and there's maybe is it the beat of my own drum, or am I one of many people kind of like running a little media company now?
I think you only have two options. You either are going to be on somebody else's treadmill, you can't set the speed or the incline, and you're going to have to do that. Or, I mean, to make anything happen, you have to have forward movement. The beauty of it is you're running your own treadmill right now.
You know what I think the trick is of that? As I kind of like get older, when you kind of, even with like a relationship or with people, probably the best way to find out your sensibilities is, you kind of like go too far one way and you're like, okay, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Same with anything. But I think with being able to do that, it really does. And other people say this, but like it really is the diversification thing. It's like I have stand up, my podcast, and making videos, and my like YouTube channel, right? Mm. And those three things are all somewhat, they can run separately. You know what I mean? Like stand-up comedy, I could just be that, and I could just be a stand-up, and that would be its whole thing. Like my podcast and my studio, like that could be its own thing, and my YouTube videos could be its own thing. So having those like three things that are sort of separate, I think that's what allows my brain to be free a little bit, because then when one's
you're not screwed if one goes down.
You're not screwed if one goes down.
And then there's a lack of pressure,
which makes you more fearless.
Yes.
Yeah. And then it makes you a little calmer. And then it also gives you a chance to like let your brain let it go. Because if you're a type of guy that's like always going to be working, so you can smother something, Yeah.
And it also
it lets you like not smother it and go working on other things.
If you have enough,
so that's a big part of it.
Streams though too. And because the thing in the independent journey is there's always going to be someone that occasionally walks in front of you, wants to stand in front of one of your streams. And the more you have going on, the more you can just be like, well, fuck you, guy. Like, I got other stuff too, so you're not just going to push me around or bully me or make me not say that something you don't want me to say.
Totally. So many times you're just like, well, then I won't do it then. I don't know. Like, I always find it funny, like, you'll be talking to someone else, they're like pitching you on something, and you're like, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense, and they're kind of getting mad, and you're like, you're pitching me. Like, no, you don't have to do anything with anyone. That's with like agents. Like, you can just say like, I don't want to audition for things. Like, you can just do whatever you want. And then on top of that, I think this is a life thing. The same way that, you have like, you might have your personal thing, your relationships thing, and then your work thing, and then whatever. Mm. Whenever you have more things, then there's always a win somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure Like even like, you know, you have your podcast now. I feel like I'm sure you're always looking at numbers, right? Imagine you had one channel where it's like all the numbers are like just kind of dipping right now and it's like stressful, you know? But then if you have like, you're like, oh, but then my Facebook's kind of kicking. Like it's always like ups and downs. But when there's 20 places, there's ups and downs. It's, you know, it's more of like a manageable thing. You're like, yeah, that's the game. But when you have one thing that's down now, when it's like, it affects you too much. So you're not as tied into like one thing.
Yeah, it's a superpower to have a lot of interest and a lot of irons in the fire. Because, you know, oh, let's say, you know, this video I just put out did dog shit, but I was able to, you know, teach wrestling on Tuesday. That class went really well. And then, oh, this real estate went through. So boom, we're good on that too. And then it makes the other losses feel not so much.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know, I'm bound to lose sometime. I guess I lost.
And then you're just playing the game, right? Where it's like if you're playing basketball, it's like the goal isn't to make every shot. The goal is to, you know, get more shots than the other team. So in this game, it's like the game is to have more wins than losses, right? And I think that about like jokes and a lot of things, right? So I think that there's always something that, as long as something's moving forward, you feel like you're moving forward. And I feel like as a person, most times people get like depressed or anything or hopeless is when they feel like it's not moving forward, right? So if you have a lot of things, something's always moving forward. And then you can kind of like spring load off that to get back in the game if you feel like you're losing your centered.
What we found out, folks, is life is one grand old adventure. And you're a guy I could talk to for hours. We have to go drink with rabbis in the street. I think Jewish people.
You aren't drinking with them, are you?
I'm going to drink a little bit. I don't drink a lot.
No, but they drink?
Even rabbis are drinking. And I have a couple of Jewish contacts that have been calling me, trying to get me to this P0rn festival. But this is, I guess, what I want to say is, well, first, Ryan, how do people find you? And if they want to enjoy your comedy, where can they go?
Yeah, my podcast is The Boys Cast with Ryan Long, youtube.com/The Boys Cast, but then everywhere else where you find podcasts, youtube.com/Ryan Long Comedy. I do a sketch every Monday. I'm on tour right now, dates at ryanlongcomedy.com and Ryan Long Comedy and everything else too.
If you enjoy laughing, if you enjoy life, check this man out. I had a wonderful time. I'll see you guys next episode.